Yeah.
We're gonna see if you really, oh yeah, no, right.
Right.
Could be not adopted.
Right.
Or even better, some system.
Yeah. As always, right?
I was thinking when you were speaking at the end of this section. I'd like to know more if there are paragraphs. You get the sense of that.
I mean, there are certainly writers, you know, through that period. I just think it's not the only, you know, it's interesting. I mean, it is a dramatic, you know, it is a dramatic. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So it's all ready to see them.
So shall I start? I mean, sorry, I didn't.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Walk right in. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we can go ahead. So, well, everyone can hear me all right? Yeah. Good. Well, first of all, hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the Global 1922 workshop, or welcome back if you're rejoining. And more specifically, welcome to the fifth session of the workshop entitled Pontus and Armenia. So we're continuing from yesterday's terrific set of papers and discussion. It was really excellent in every way. But before moving on to our papers, allow me to say a bit on our speakers in the order that they will be speaking. Our first speaker is Victoria Abrahamian. Victoria is a PhD candidate in the history department, the University of Neuchâtel, and part of the ERC-funded border project entitled Towards a Decentered History of the Middle East, Trends, Border Spaces, Circulations, Frontier Effects and State Formation, 1920-1946, led by Professor Jordi Tegel. Her research focuses on Armenian refugees, nationalism, state building, and discourse in interwar Syria during the French Mandate from 1920 to 1939. Her research explores how specifically the Armenian refugees played at once a direct and an indirect role in shaping the state building processes in Syria in terms of defining national identity, expanding state authority, and consolidating state borders, as her paper evinces. She has recently published an article on the topic entitled Citizen Strangers, Identity Labeling and Discourse in the French Mandatory Syria, 1920-1932, in Journal of Migration History. Our second speaker is Zeynep Türkyılmaz, who received her PhD from the Department of History at the UCLA in 2009. Her dissertation, Anxieties of Conversion, Missionaries, State and Heterodox Communities in the Late Ottoman Empire, which I'm personally a big fan of, is based on intensive research conducted in Ottoman, British, and several American missionary archives. She was a recipient of several fellowships, among which are Mellon Foundation Sawyer Seminar, a postdoctoral fellowship at UNC Chapel Hill between 2009 and 2010, and the EUME Fellowship at the Forum Transregionale Studien 2010-11. She worked as an assistant professor of history at Dartmouth College between 2011 and 16, and as a program coordinator and research fellow at Koç University's Research Center for Anatolian Civilizations in Istanbul, finishing her book project based on her dissertation. She returned to EUME as a fellow recently for the academic years 2017 to 2021. And since October 2021, she's a research fellow of the research training group Minor Cosmopolitanism at University of Potsdam, and remains affiliated with EUME. So without further ado, let us begin. So over to you, Victoria.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, great. So the paper I will be presenting you today is titled Armenian Refugees Between Greece, Soviet Armenia and Syria, 1922-1926. And in fact, as Professor Karamuza just presented, my core research is about Armenian refugees in Syria during the interwar years and not in Greece. It is only through systematic reading of my primary sources, in particular, and the Armenian press published in Syria, that I came to understand how intimately the experiences of Armenian refugees in Greece and Syria were connected. And moreover, how intimately the discussions happening in Geneva about the settlement of Armenian refugees in Greece, in Syria, but also Soviet Armenia were entangled and interconnected. In fact, in the beginning of the 20s, after the successful start of the resettlement of the Greek refugees in Greece, Armenian political leaders approached Nansen, asking to extend or to stipulate a similar refugee settlement scheme for the Armenian refugees in Soviet Armenia. Nansen agreed, and a major developmental project in Soviet Armenia was being discussed in Geneva, which became known as the Nansen Settlement Scheme or the Sardarabad or Yerevan Settlement Scheme. In fact, this meant that a large parcel of land needed to be irrigated to make it a farm suitable for farming, on which as many as 50,000 Armenian refugees could be settled. The money to be obtained was to be based on the model of the Greece, an international loan brokered by the League of Nations, where member states would be giving or lending the money. However, unlike to Greece, this settlement scheme failed because many member states of the League of Nations were reluctant to donate or to give money for a development project to a state which was on the opposite ideological orbit to Soviet Armenia. And this connects, the discussions on this settlement connects a bit to the yesterday's discussions and Professor Robson's discussion on creating profitable refugee settlement schemes. It was in this context that even though the settlement scheme in Yerevan failed, however, Greek government used these discussions and this opportunity to ask the League of Nations to give the priority to the 50,000 Armenian refugees who were in Greece as a part of population exchange, but also after the disaster of Smyrna, to remove them as a priority out of Greece. In fact, by reading these documents, it is interesting that the Greek authorities explicitly say why they wanted to get rid of the Armenians. It was not their big numbers, which were about 60,000, nor the lack of the funding, but the fears that Armenian refugees would not be willing to assimilate easily and quickly, and it will become or it will create a new minority issue for the Greek government, which it did not want, obviously. It was in this light that a new discussion started in Geneva, what to do with the unwanted Armenian refugees of Greece, and several destinations were discussed, among them France, Syria, South America, and of course, Soviet Armenia. And the discussion that more refugees would probably be coming to Syria created in turn nationalist polemic in Syria among the Syrian nationalists who feared that French mandatory authorities had a hidden plan of bringing more Armenian refugees to Syria, which was already home to a substantial number of Armenian refugees. And by doing this, to implement their hidden political goals, similar to the refugee Jewish settlements that was happening in the neighboring Palestine during the same time, for example. As discussions intensified that something had to be done for these refugees, transferring them to elsewhere, Soviet Armenia too became increasingly more interested to claim these refugees as the only legitimate homeland for these refugees, and being categorically against their transfer out of Greece, and especially to French-mandated Syria or in South America. And eventually, 5,000 of these refugees were indeed transferred to Soviet Armenia. So no refugee at this time arrived to Syria from Greece. The other important, interesting aspect of these discussions was, in fact, the desire of Greek government to make pressure and indeed get rid of these refugees. So they started immediate deportations of these refugees. Refugees were given very short notice, usually 1-2 days. Their names were posted on the doors of the civil administrations of the cities that they resided. And they were given 2 days to depart without the right to sell anything or to exchange anything. In the beginning, small number of Armenians were deported to the island, faraway Greek islands, but this was a way to create an atmosphere and to make a pressure to find a solution for these refugees, in fact. These deportations created a profound impact elsewhere, and it created also a shock for the Armenian refugees everywhere. All the colonies were following day by day what was happening in Greece, because many could not believe such deportations could happen in Greece, in a country which was considered a brotherly country, people who suffered a great deal, similar to the Armenians previously, and they were, it's unthinkable that harsh or brutal deportations could happen. But because they were happening, in Syria in particular, I started to observe in my primary sources and the press in particular, how Armenian refugee leaders, the intellectuals, the editors started to discuss daily what could they do in order to avoid such a fate, in fact, the fate of the refugees in Greece. They started also to analyze what were the main concerns and the complaints of the Syrians about the Armenians. And then they found it out that many Armenian articles in the local press turned around the refugee camps, the large refugee camps in the outskirts of the large cities, main cities of Syria, but also Lebanon. And Armenian refugee leaders started to advocate actively against the camps. There was an urgent need to remove these refugees out of the camps into the urban or rural settlements and get rid of the camps, which created a negative opinion about them. The second issue was about begging, to make sure that no Armenian was seen begging in the streets, especially on Sundays. This was a way to also make Armenian refugees less visible in the Syrian society, in a way, especially that could create a negative opinion about them. And the third issue, which was a contentious issue both in Greece and in Syria, it was the issue of the citizenship. In fact, in 1924, just a year after the signature of the Lausanne Treaty, when the treaty was ratified, as soon as it was ratified by the French Parliament, within days, Armenian refugees in Syria and Lebanon were given the opportunity to take the local citizenship, to become Syrian and Lebanese. And it is interesting to note that no refugee rushed to take this opportunity. Rather, they started to debate, was it how should they proceed? And mostly, in fact, they debated to organize a pan-Armenian conference where they would discuss all the aspects of this new citizenship and then to decide. And the same was happening in Greece. In fact, Greek government provided citizenship as an alternative to the deportations. But all the Armenians refused to take the local citizenship. They had two arguments for this. First of all, they argued that citizenship, it was the new trap. It was a new tool of assimilation. It was not a solution. And secondly, they argued that if these deportation policies of the Greek government were informed by the Ittihadist policies, then it means that if they take the citizenship, they were to be deported anyway, but in later stage, in the same way as those who were converted to Islam were not deported immediately, but later on by the Ittihadis during the genocide years. In fact, the citizenship issue of the Armenians in Greece was problematic up until the end of 30s. It was not resolved because they refused, and when they changed their mind a few years later, it was the Greek government who refused to give them citizenship. Meanwhile, in Syria, it was different. So they were offered the opportunity of citizenship in 2024, and given the deportations in Greece, Armenian political leaders and one political party in particular, the REF, Armenian Revolutionary Federation, started to actively advocate for the speedy acquisition of the citizenship, arguing that by taking the citizenship, we will become natives, locals, and we will get rid of our refugee label. And most importantly, we will not be deported. Maybe just before finishing to mention another interesting episode that I found in this entangled refugee settlements, that Soviet Union Moscow authorities in their turn wished to use these discussions of the refugee settlement of Armenians in Greece and the deportations, suggesting to exchange equal number of refugees with the autochthonous Greek refugees around the Black Sea region, nowadays Georgia, Sukhumi region, with the unwanted refugees of Greece. I mean, this offer was turned down initially by the Greek government, but later on I found an evidence that it indeed took place later on, which shows how the conversations about the exchange of populations was very much seemed to be the accepted option of unmixing and the solution of the refugee settlements, and also how intimately Armenian refugee experience of Syria, Greece were connected. Thank you very much. I stop here.
Excellent, Victoria. Thank you very much for keeping to the exact time of 15 minutes. Zeynep, now you are next. On to you.
Okay, I would like to share my screen if I can manage that briefly. I don't know why I'm having trouble. Here we go. Can you see it without problem? Is that okay?
Yep, it looks okay.
Okay.
Uh,
Maybe. First of all, I would like to thank organizers for including me in this event. Thank you very much for a very wonderful first day of panels. And today I will present on the issue of Pontus. In my initial proposal, actually, I proposed a bigger project, but I am nowhere close to there yet. Hopefully, I will get to that as time progresses. Without further delay. So, a cipher telegram marked as extremely confidential and personal and addressed to the Minister of Interior Talat Pasha, sent on May 11, 1916 from Giresun, conveyed the following message. When one considers, due to the abundance of Greeks along the coast, necessity of their transfer to the interior areas in a manner unlike the transfer of Armenians, this brings to mind the strong possibility that a significant number of troops would be occupied with this business. Yet I propose, for instance, if at first all the Greeks that are within the 20-kilometer range of the battle line could withdraw to the interior of the coastal areas they desired within the time limit we assigned, and after this, and gradually this area could be expanded to 30, 40, 50, 60 kilometers, then complaints, desertion, brigandage would not take place. And thereby, I doubt that civil and military administration will have to be occupied with these too much. Implementation of this plan should start with Vakfı-Kebir, Görele, and then should continue in the following order. To Trebolu, Giresun, perhaps all the towns, and thus relatively cleansing these of the resident Greek population. When disaster, flight, and misery captivating them, and misery becomes their inseparable companion, the misery captivating them would reduce the brigandage and animosity they dare, as well as their wealth, to a desirable level, and would secure that the rest remaining in the coastal areas would get the hell out of our sacred patria, Vatanı Mukaddes. The lines belong to Cemal Azmi, the Governor General of Trabzon province, also known as the Butcher of Trabzon, for having not only ordered some of the most cruel forms of torture and extermination against Armenians, but also zealously taking part in the massacres in person only a year ago. The governor, Cemal Azmi, sent this telegram from Ordu, where he sought refuge after handing the city of Trabzon to Chrysanthos, the Archbishop of Trabzon, on April 16, 1916, after it became clear to him that the Ottoman forces would not hold. Until February 1918, Cemal Azmi remained as the governor. And right after the armistice of Mundros on November 1st, 1918, he fled on a German torpedo boat to Berlin, where two Armenian Revolutionary Federation gunmen assassinated him along with Bahattin Shakir, another notorious name of the Armenian genocide, 4 years later in 1922. Against such horrendous record, however, when it comes to Pontic Greeks, Cemal Azmi is ironically remembered rather favorably, almost fondly. One common citation is his amiable address to Archbishop Chrysanthos before surrendering Trabzon. It has been alleged that he said, in a rather submissive tone, "We took the city from the Greeks, and now we are returning to them," and pleaded him to take care of the Muslim Islamic heritage of the city. The authenticity of this anecdote has been challenged by some, but even if it were genuine, this favorable take on Cemal Azmi has been rather intriguing for me, as the deciphered telegram cited above and the rest of my research at Ottoman archives testify. Cemal Azmi was actually one of the earliest, though now forgotten, masterminds of Pontic displacement. And this telegram was the smoking gun. Critical scholarship on mass violence caution us against fetishizing archives or looking for the document. Yet in this case, argue it's the smoking gun for two reasons. First of all, obviously, given the Cemal Azmi's record and an ongoing genocide, extermination of Armenians, his choice of vocabulary, like very clearly using the word cleansing and removal and inflicting catastrophe and misery on a specific population, this was a clear intent to obviously target and ethnically cleanse Greeks of Pontus. The second, and more importantly, this telegram did not remain simply as a proposal. From 1916-1918, Cemal Azmi followed through the entire process of deportation of Pontic Greeks from the coastal areas to the interior, personally involved in the on the venues, on the use of troops, and the mechanisms to carry out these acts. But he's neither remembered for his targeting Pontic Greeks, nor held accountable for any of that. It was late Anthony Breyer who most eloquently defined Pontic experience under the Ottoman rule, especially in Trabzon proper and its highlands, an exception. For historians, exceptions are very attractive, but also often a fantasy, a romanticism, and not a reality. As someone who worked extensively on crypto-Christians of Pontus, I can reify what Breyer established. I have been repeatedly intrigued by the dynamics of coexistence in the region, whereby Pontic Greeks enjoyed a cultural hegemony, which helped create an environment where everyday hierarchies on the basis of religion did not disappear, but was smoothened and even blurred. Unlike the Armenian communities who were hit hard and devastated by pogroms of 1890s and 1909 throughout Asia Minor, Pontic Greeks continued to exist without a major intrusion or infliction of mass violence until 1940. So things began to change with the invasion of Trabzon, obviously, in 1916. Just to give you an idea of Pontic, the line of invasion, the red line I put on the map actually marks the area that was under the Russian invasion. So the eastern part was under the Russian invasion, whereas Western Black Sea was where Cemal Azmi was based and continued to govern the rest of the province. Even during this period, Pontic Greeks tried to keep their everyday life intact, and I also provided numbers to show the prosperous and flourishing life, give you an idea of a prosperous and flourishing life in Western Pontus, which actually became a Pontic settlement, especially in the second half of 19th century after the closure of the mines. So in the literature, actually, what happened in 1916 or 17 is also pretty much a no issue. For the Pontic Greeks, who basically take the history from predominantly from 1919 onwards, and remembers the arrival of Mustafa Kemal to the area as the beginning of a genocide that claimed over 300,000 lives. Whereas in the Turkish literature, there's a similar ignorance for what happened before 1919. It's a no issue, and generally what happened in Black Sea is remembered as the treason and the activities of the Greek bands, which was eventually subdued and suppressed, maybe using a little bit more violence, but they deserved it because there were basically gangs killing Muslims. So what was the justification Cemal Azmi used for these deportations? First of all, obviously, the most obvious justification he used was the invasion of Trabzon, and he underlined that Greeks were sympathetic to Russian advances due to their religious and political affinity. Pontic Greeks might get arsenal and other military aid to rebel against the Ottomans and prepare the conditions for another invasion. And deserters and draft dodgers among the Pontic Greeks were another problem that was often cited. And yesterday, the issue of fire was talked at the very last panel. And actually, fire, putting entire villages on fire was used to prevent increasing numbers of draft dodgers among the Pontic villages, starting from 1916 onwards. And this was, again, a mechanism probably developed by Cemal Azmi and endorsed by Talat Pasha. So the discussions around what needs to be with Pontic Greeks, whether Cemal Azmi's push for a transfer to the interiors has any grounds, was very heavily discussed among Minister of Interior Talat Pasha, Commander of the Third Army Vehip Pasha, and Minister of War Enver Pasha. Interestingly enough, Talat Pasha was very cautious about it from the very beginning. He argued that as long as Greece didn't join the war, they should keep the Pontic Greeks on the place, unless they were really engaging in rebellious acts and creating trouble. Commander Vehip Pasha was also not very fond of it, but Enver Pasha and Cemal Azmi were on the more hawkish side and were quite supportive of a possible scenario for deportations. How did the local officers understood these discussions? Was it really about Greek bands? Were they really concerned about the safety and security? I provide again in a conversation that was taking place between the locals and local governors and Minister of Interior Talat Pasha. Basically, the district governor of Canik, it writes in 1916, and he says, I mean, we don't really have the means to do that, but actually dispersing the Greeks, who are the majority of population in the district, by these means and replacing them with the Muslim element would be beneficial and advantageous from the perspective of the country's future. So clearly an intent for ethnic cleansing was simmering after Cemal Azmi began to push for his agenda. Actually, Cemal Azmi had already started the deportations, especially among the draft dodgers and, any Pontic Greek having troubles with the Muslim neighbors and creating, was marked suspicious. Basically, they had already been deported by the Cemal Azmi's intervention. But we clearly see a decision for deportations starting as late as January 1917. First Talat Pasha's order, and later on Enver Pasha's order detailing not only deportations, transferred to the interior, not only in Pontus, but entire Greek populations in the coastal areas. And here, obviously, one should draw attention to the changes taking place in Greece. After these discussions began to again take root, especially after the national defense coup in September 1916, and particularly after Greece joined the Allied powers in January 1917. Basically, both Talat Pasha and Enver Pasha was on the boat that their kin had to be punished, and the decision for deportations was finalized. So sorry for my very poorly done map, but I tried to mark the locations where these Pontic Greeks were inhabiting and the areas that they were deported. Hopefully I will have a better map, but that gives you an idea. I mean, there's probably more than 20 kilometers, much longer distances than had been originally suggested, but the caravans began to leave from these coastal areas. So who were deported? Again, the emphasis is still the gangs and that they are creating treason, and there is a risk for Russian invasion. But then when it comes to actually the people who were deported, we see that the first group of people, very similar to what happened to Armenians, were the prominent figures, notables of the community, like the merchants, priests, And there were also some odd exiles, right? I mean, two cases I would like to bring to your attention again from the Ottoman archives. One, actually, we know about his case through a letter submitted by his lawyer, who was based in Germany, and written addressed directly to Talat Pasha. And apparently, merchant Ashil Anastasiadi was one of the major merchants providing tobacco to Germany. And his lawyer and some of his family was already in Germany, wrote personally to Talat and asking for the reversal of this decision. Another odd case, and this time was supported by the German consul, was the case of pro-German journalist Neophytos, was also sent to the interior, and basically the German consul was very surprised and saying that, I mean, how can you send this person to the interior on the suspicion that he's supporting Russia? I mean, he's one of the few among them who actually was on our side. Throughout this period, also the questions of abandoned property, especially hazelnut orchard, tobacco farms, was repeatedly came to the foreground. And although it was always underlined that this case is going to be different from the Armenian case. This is not abandoned property. This needs to be secured until the arrival of the refugees, of the exiles. But obviously that wasn't the case, especially with the arrival of Muslim refugees. The homes of the Greek deportees became the homes of these refugees, which later on, with the return of the deportees after the end of First World War, became a serious issue. I will here refer to yet another governor, local governor, Mehmet Reşit, who was kind of an outlier. He was a more marginal and more prominent voice that tried to separate himself from Cemal Pasha's position, and he actually resisted from the earlier periods to deportations plans, basically gave a number of, an estimate number of deportees to us for the very first time from his own, obviously, town. And he cited around, he cited 13,466 men and women transferred to the interior, and this constitutes actually 1/6 of the population, official population number. And he's underlined that actually it should be expected that 1/3 of these people, only 1/3 of these people can return, because some of them obviously naturally would die, and the destiny of the others are not done. So the provisioning would be an issue. But we see that it wasn't just provisioning, especially land seizures, home seizures became a prominent issue and burning issue, especially after the Ottoman center lost the war and the British inspector in the Black Sea, in certain locations particularly, ordered that the homes occupied by the other than Greeks should be returned to the returnees in 4 days. It's very doubtful that any of this could be implemented, but transfer of property, transfer of especially living areas became an issue. I think I'm kind of over my time. Right?
Yeah, one or 2 minutes on. Yep.
Maybe with this one I will end. So actually, the Greek gangs issue began to be a burning issue with the beginning of the deportations. The initial brigandage by the Greek draft dodgers was a more manageable issue, and they were not necessarily attacking any particular group unless they came under fire. But after 1917, especially with 1918, we see that there were Greek armed Greek bands that not only targeted the local local militia or the Ottoman military, but also began to attack on local Muslims. So for the first time, actually, the Ottoman center or the new Ankara government that would take its place was justified in talking about the Greek fans as an issue. And throughout this talk and in my overall project, my Global 1922 is about a very sudden, a very violent and unforeseeable form of unmixing of populations. And here I try to see two processes taking place. A community that's trying to make sense of their environment from being uprooted from their homeland. But also I'm trying to understand the formulation of official policies. Why and how Cemal Azmi and later on Talat Pasha and many others, and later on Ankara government actually took on this policy of targeting a community that had been marked with coexistence and an exceptional form of coexistence. Thank you so much, and looking forward to training. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zeynep, for Victoria as well for these two fascinating papers. I have some comments and maybe just a few broad questions. I'm really pleased to have been invited to comment on these two papers and chair this panel as well for many reasons, but most notably because they bring two stories together, that of Greek and Armenian experience, which is typically told separately. And as these two brilliant papers show us, that these two events unraveled more or less simultaneously intersect each other in important ways, not just at the policy level, not only as subjects to international law, not again only as at the discursive level, but also in very physical material terms, which I really found fascinating in both of these papers. So I found, for example, how the horrifying knowledge of being targeted to the excessive state violence traveled from one community to the other, and used by the state very strategically as well. Just really fascinating, if really terrifying at the same time. Or again, to see how two refugee groups and experiences intersected each other in actual space, only to be used again by states and the international community to define and set hierarchies for that specific experience, which again I found fascinating. So I have many questions and comments, but mostly very, very specific ones, which I'm happy to share with Victoria and Zeynep individually later on. The interest of time, and more importantly, because the audience here will be asking way more informed questions that I'm capable of. So I will keep my comments and questions very short, focusing on a few themes, categories that I found to be dominant in each paper. So let me start with Victoria's paper. Victoria offers a terrific angle, I thought, specifically with her focus on Armenian refugees in Greece, a history that I know nothing about, admittedly. But what really struck me in that part of the story specifically is the fluidity between two categories: refugeedom, state of being refugee, and citizenship. That I tend to think not necessarily is mutually exclusive, but antithetical to a certain extent, particularly at this moment of excessive desire to homogeneity and to just unmixing ethnically, religiously, linguistically, so on and so forth. In this story, citizenship appears almost a voluntary matter on the refugee side. So I'm really curious to hear more about that if that's possible. I know it's only part of the larger project that you're working on, but if you can tell us a bit about that process, about the Greek government side on deciding on offering that citizenship option, and as well as the refugee side. And minority citizenship, which Laura Robson's paper yesterday, as well as several others, gave a broad context for that. This is a very peculiar concept, but I found this one particularly peculiar, so I'm especially curious about it. And to add one more dimension to that, this has to do with my own curiosity, I found it doubly interesting as it seems to create a lot of internal tension as well. This applies to, I guess, the Syrian case as well, but this I found it quite interesting. Internal tension, as if I understand it correctly, between such groups as Dashnaks and Hunchaks. You're looking at their particular publications, so it would also help us to understand where those groups are coming from, which I was curious about. So this kind of connects to Derek's paper yesterday in this concept of the greater war. And I'm really curious to understand what, I mean, you know, such groups as Hunchaks made of this new strange order. Obviously, they're against it, but where they're coming from would be really interesting to hear. And as for Zeynep's paper, it too offers a really terrific, fascinating angle, which again, admittedly, I know very little about. What really struck me in Zeynep's paper is how exceptionally, and I'm using this very differently from Breyer's, exception, I guess, and seemingly deliberately local the Pontus story is, so much so that it's entirely detached by variety of not just really the local Greeks and the central state, but variety of different actors from the rest of the Greek experience, at least during this moment in time. And what you said in your talk is really interesting, that they all of a sudden they become akin by 1919, but the very localness of the earlier story, which I found really interesting. I mean, arguably a similar situation has been going on, not just 1914, but earlier too. I mean, the Balkan Wars, this is already going on. A lot of people are just terrified, terrorized to leave, and probably in smaller scale, but I wondered at how that broader story comes about. So basically the emphasis on this locality, that detachment in relation to Pontus, its historical and categorical meaning and function is precisely what I was curious about, if that makes sense as a question. I mean, the one especially fascinating example I found is that this localized understanding, allusion to Wilsonianism by the governor of Gümüşhane, if I'm not mistaken, specifically made in relation to Pontus. And this again just connects to a point that was made, I think, by Maximianu yesterday about very individual, very local understanding and meaning put on Wilsonianism and those ideals in general. But still, I mean, Pontus' story, as you said, is taking place as part of an exceedingly globalizing world. So it would again be great to hear where that deliberately local story of Pontus is located, how it's connected to that broader context. So if you could, I mean, if that's possible, if you could say a bit more about that. So I will stop here. If I don't know, Zeynep, Victoria, if you want to respond to what I said, take a minute or two, then we can open the floor up for questions.
Sure. Shall I start?
Sure, go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Karamazov, for very nice feedback and for very nice and important questions. The one question about the fluidity of being between refugeedom and citizenship. Very much, yes. And in fact, studying the concept of citizenship and how it became to be understood and perceived by the Armenian refugees during the 20s has been very fascinating for me as well, because it is so different from what we would have expected their reaction to be from today's perspective, to take the citizenship and solve the issues. And then it also connects to what you are saying, the Great War, which was over, but the settlement issues were unsettled. It is very much connected, and citizenship had many dimensions and many layers, and everything was being much more complicated by the incoming of Soviet Armenia claiming these refugees. In the case of Armenian refugees in particular, I think there were two issues. First, Armenian refugees dispersed in all these countries did not, in the beginning of 20s, did not consider that there was no solution for them yet, that they still expected that something will be done eventually for them. So the Lausanne Treaty, although it was concluded, but the construction of so-called Armenian home was always in the air. It was also so because the British high officials had told the Armenians, that the Armenian delegation in Lausanne, that although we take out the Armenian home from the treaty, because Turkey refused to conclude the treaty if anything about Armenians was there, but we keep it in mind. I think this was this kind of a promise, unwritten promise, that kept the Armenian leaders, but also refugees, waiting and seeing what could eventually be done for them. During this time, Soviet Union and Soviet Armenia had also legitimacy crisis, sovereignty, because Soviet Union was not recognized yet officially. In fact, the British and French recognition came in the 20s, but the USA recognized Soviet Union only in 33 or 32. Until that moment, this diplomatic isolation felt very strongly. And in 24, when citizenship issue was being discussed both in Syria and Greece, in fact, the news arrived that Soviet Armenia is sending its delegations through Hawks. That time it was the 8th Committee, a political organization that collected relief for Soviet Armenia and eventually became a political tool for propaganda, and to claim these Armenian refugees as citizens for Soviet Armenia. And in fact, Hanchak circles, Hanchaks were a socialist Armenian political party who were quite close with the communists and propagated pro-Soviet Armenian approach. They, of course, took this side that all Armenian refugees abroad shall become the citizens of Soviet Armenia. And I think this added another dimension to the internal tension. Yes, the whole community was in fact split broadly between two lines, pro-Soviet Armenia and the anti-Soviet coalition, which was led by the Detachment, by REF. So citizenship in Greece in particular, so Armenian refugees categorically refused in the 20s, and this deportation of Armenian refugees from Greece not restarted, but the conversations were opened up again in 30, the same demand the Greek government made in 27, but without a follow-up, and then in 30, demanding to remove the Armenians, because before that only 5,000 were transferred, but because of economic difficulties, the community was already reduced by half anyway. There were not many, and Greek demand came after the Great Depression, when Greece was hit with economic crisis, and then the whole conversation was taking place again in League of Nations, in Soviet Armenia, in Syria, because again the same question was, if we bring a few thousand refugees from Greece to Syria again. And this was, in my dissertation, I treat this as the culmination of these talks of the Armenian home. And in this episode, Soviet Union categorically refuses the transfer, and once again, another 5,000 go to Soviet Armenia. So the citizenship, yes, was seen very negatively by the refugees. But in Syria, where they took the citizenship, in fact, they hoped that by doing so, they would erase the refugee level, which did not happen, obviously, overnight. They were still referred as refugees, and many years was needed to erase this level, if I may put it in this way. I think I connected this to the Great War in this multiple claims. So if you are fine, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And Zeynep?
Thank you very much for your comments, Jada. So I'll try to very quickly actually connect two of your questions, the detachment and the global moment. Actually, indeed, Pontic Greeks were a detached community, and they were not the gem of the Greek nationalism. You know, they were not really considered the high point of Greek nationalism, particularly due to their very complex relations with the other local population, Ottoman culture, Islam, and conversion stories. So there was a very local and flourishing culture, a very, a prominent one. But in terms of rising Greek nationalism and the Greek state, they were kind of a strange case, strange community. I mean, there are more works coming from Greece looking at the, relations between mainland Greek nationalism and emerging Pontic enlightenment and nationalization. But let me say that looking from the Ottoman perspective, Pontic Greeks were not the first to be saved by the Greek nationalists, right? And throughout this process, actually, very little has been done by Venizelos to help the Pontic Greeks. That's actually part of the tragedy of the Pontic Greeks, because global 1920 meant that their own means that secured, that maintained their very complex matrix of coexistence did not work anymore. Their survival strategies, their life standards could not be continuous as they had been, right? At the verge of shattering empires, they had to also collapse within those shattering mechanisms. Like Professor Winter mentioned yesterday, I mean, civilization of the war, weaponization of the populations, without any kind of significant political activism on the part of Pontic Greeks. And I want to emphasize this over and over and over again. I mean, retrospectively, there are attributes and there are all, narrativization about the heroism of Pontic Greeks, too little, too late. So it's actually global 1922 is about inescapability, inevitability of these processes as far as a community, even a community like Pontic Greeks, a detached community like Pontic Greeks are concerned. When I mean detached, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were not connected. They were very connected. They were connected with trade colonies. They went all over the world. They were very active. But in terms of political attachment, being independent, that didn't really serve them good in this process.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Zeynep. So we have a very short question by George Lemos in the Q&A, and then we have two hands by Violetta and Lina, then a longer question by Jane Cohen at the Q&A box again. So let me read the first question. I think this is for Victoria. When did the Soviet-Greek-Armenian exchange take place?
Yes, as I said, I am not a historian of Greece, or I am not studying the Armenian refugee experience in Greece explicitly. So it comes in my research as far as it is connected with Syria. And in fact, it comes in the 24, and again, it comes in 30, what I briefly mentioned, when there is a second episode of transfer. And there, in the Armenian archival record, I have seen one sentence in the Armenian state archival record saying that acknowledging that such transfer did happen, saying that the exchange of Armenians with Greece, of Soviet Union. So I understood that it happened, but I did not have a date to give you, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
Violetta?
Thank you very much to both of you. Wonderful papers. I declare here, I'm talking from my experiences rather than from as an historian, so forgive me if there is anything missing there. And again, it's an unfair question to Victoria, but I was wondering if you know anything about the Armenians who remained in Greece, the refugees who remained in Greece, and if there is any research about them. I would love to know. Because I'm aware that there were people who remained in Greece up to the 70s. I met some of them. So for Zeynep, I was wondering, because Pontic Greeks had extremely strong links already in the 1910s with communities in Georgia, there were a lot of migrants there. Was there a movement or towards those communities? Did people try to escape from those deportations and rather, choose to join relatives and friends in Georgia? Thank you very much.
I guess Victoria and then Zeynep.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. For sure, they are still there is still a vibrant Armenian community in Greece, and not everyone was transferred. And in fact, one interesting point, I found a discussion among Soviet authorities saying that the aim of claiming these refugees, that they will never be able to take all of them out, but just by taking a few thousand of them, helped each time to calm the atmosphere and ensure the Greek government. And as soon as the refugees showed that they were on the waiting list, waiting to be transferred to Soviet Union or Soviet Armenia, they were left alone. They were not dispossessed. They were not deported anymore by the Greek government, and obviously very small numbers were transferred. In the beginning of 30s, I think this community numbered 15,000 merely, because Greece economy was hardly hit by economic worldwide crisis, and it was difficult even for the locals. but this is not my research, so I do not know any more about them. But I know that during this time, Davide Rodogno has studied their relations with the League of Nations settlement plans, and I can probably look for new research who is researching about them and give it to you later on. I am not really familiar. Thank you.
Actually, you have a you have a great point. I wasn't really able to get into the their survival strategies, resistance, but obviously the very closure of mines that brought some of them to Western Black Sea also took some of them to depths of Russia, Georgia, Armenia, even further in Central Asia. They were all connected and related. So at the Ottoman archives, actually, there are documents that show that some of them are trying to get on the Russian ships or the small boats to escape, especially the women and children, caught trying to get on the boat to get to Russia. I mean, that doesn't specifically say it's Georgia, but obviously, one of the closest arrival points for them, one of the easier access points for them would be Georgia. So yes, definitely escaping, especially, as I said, women and children, was considered, but when they caught these women and children, they stopped them. So they didn't let them escape either. So this didn't remain just as a mechanism to, stop the men. So that was it also included men and women and children.
Excellent. So we have Lena, and then we have the longer question by Jane Cohen, and then we have Professor Winter, I think, from the room. And go ahead, Lena.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the two papers. I learned so much about populations and facts I didn't know. I would like to suggest to Victoria that maybe the Armenians that were deported, as you say, were considered communists. I think that you have to see that point of view in your research, because I know that the Armenians were heavily suspected as being communists in Greece. And on the other side, although I'm really not a specialist, I have never heard of Armenian deportations in Greece. So just consider that I'm not sure of what I'm saying. And if you can comment on that. And for Zeynep, I would like to ask you if the project of creating a Pontus state, a Pontic state, at the same time as the project of creating an Armenian state, influenced the local relations there. And if you can give us an idea of the differences that exist between, apart from the Russian occupation, the differences that exist between the East and the West Pontic region. Thank you very much, and really excellent papers. Thanks.
Victoria and Zeynep.
Yes, thank you very much for the important questions. Indeed, this is the belief that Armenians, but also many of the incoming Asian minor refugees of Greek origins were systematically suspected to be communist, or to be the ones to be more prone to this communist ideology. There is, you are correct, you are right in this, but in fact, the deportation of Armenians from Greece is really unknown. Even for me, it was a big discovery, I may say. It was very small scale, targeted, but it did happen in the efforts of the Greek government state building effort, I guess, in these critical years. But there is an archival record that I have. There is an interesting document that discusses why Greek government, why was also one of the main arguments of the Greek government to do so. It says that it was to remove these refugees from East Thrace and Macedonia. This is where they were, in fact, because these lands, as I understood from my records, were not that Greek at that time, and Greek government needed to put Greeks in these territories to kind of claim these territories. But because the Armenian refugees came and started to farm the abandoned lands there, so they would be rooted there, Greek government would not be able to claim this land for Greece. This is what was my understanding. So there was something else going there. And in fact, as I said, there was a League of Nations project to transfer 50,000 Armenian refugees to Soviet Armenia, and Greek government just wished to have this 50,000 from Greece because it had already so many, over 1 million own refugees to deal with. So this is, but not those who were deported were not necessarily communists. This for sure I can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Actually from 1917, I mean, after the deportations began, I guess there was more often, more room for talking about Pontic nationalism or mobilization around some sort of Pontic idea. And after the Mundros, of course, 1918, very quickly, especially the Archbishop in Western Pontus, and who was very much targeted by the Ottoman authorities as well, and other prominent members of the community also joined the, wagon of and claiming that, due to what they've gone through and that since they have a demographic superiority in the region, which was also established on the claim that there were crypto and converted Islamized Greeks, and if you also calculate them into Greek communities, because under a liberal government they will declare themselves as Greek, Pontic Greeks once again, that they constitute a majority. So after 1918, very clearly you can talk about a desire for a Pontic state, at least an autonomous region, voiced by the prominent members of the community. But as I said, I mean, Greek government in the mainland was not very fond of that idea, or also didn't have the means to secure any kind of nationalist project that would require military and other kinds of intervention. So very shortly, I guess, Pontic Greeks once again felt betrayed because they were given kind of an autonomous region within an independent Armenian state, which wasn't what they were really expecting. In terms of historical differences between West and Eastern Pontus, I mean, there is a lot already written and said about that, especially in Greece, among the Pontic Greeks there. One of the I guess distinguishing features as far as my project is concerned, Western Black Sea was much more connected, and an area that was more enjoying that kind of exceptional coexistence as defined by Anthony Breyer, first of all, due to spatial arrangement, prominent and significant population in the highlands that continued pretty much their own terms of life under the Ottoman rule for several centuries without much change. A significant conversion, Islamization in west again in the eastern part, but that conversion didn't always come with the change of culture into, or the language into Turkish, whereas in the eastern part you see Turcophone, a significant Turcophone population, although you don't see a similar Islamization taking place. More lower land, not as much altitude, which also comes with obviously more state power and more state control. And also another factor that I briefly mentioned, a significant population in the West actually had migrated from the East in the second half of the 19th century. So there are connections, but in terms of spatial arrangement and what it made possible, they were culturally also and politically eventually separated from each other.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Yes, I mean, we have a longer question in the Q&A box. I think Victoria partially answered already, and 3 more questions from the room and no time left. So could we take them all, and you can perhaps take a few minutes to respond. We'll be a bit over time, if that's okay. And we can at least receive all the questions. So the longer question in the box, it says, can you tell us a bit more on the case of Armenians who were offered and chose to take up Greek citizenship and then were later deported anyway? Were the conditions in which this happened? How was it justified? And what were responses to it within the Greek government and beyond? In other words, was there unanimity within the Greek government, or did some contest to the internal debates and discussions on the Greek side? I wonder if Armenians were openly expressing unwillingness to assimilate, or if this was just assumed by Greek government officials. Do you think the Greek government saw the Armenians as economic competitors to the Greek population? Just part of the thinking and the rationale for deportations. Many questions, as Jane Cohn noted. So maybe we can take the questions from the room. I see Gonda's hand.
Well, I'll be quick, and it's not a question, it's a comment and an answer. The date of one of the major deportations is the 30th of August, 1948. And an unpublished American observer says that 17,000 Armenians leave from mainly northern Greece and Thessaloniki. And I quote, they chose to risk the hazards of going to the Soviet Union, Stalinist, rather than to remain in Greece. Imagine the cost to Greece of the loss of these 17,000 Armenians who, ever since the Turkish massacres, had counted Greece as their home. So the date to go looking at is the 30th of August, 48 in newspapers and such. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Excellent. Go ahead, please.
Thanks. Just on a factual point in Zeynep's excellent talk, you referred once and again just now to Anthony Breyer, but in the rolling script, which was underneath your presentation, it was impossible to distinguish his name because it was completely distorted. So it needs care in doing a transcript. I have a question about going back a little bit to 1919, about Greek government policy. From what I've read about the dealings between Venizelos and the Archbishop, Venizelos was pretty cautious in what he said and what he thought Greece could do, i.e. virtually nothing. Now, what did he have in mind? Was he still hoping for a mandate, American mandate or something to sort of relieve the appalling condition of the Pontic Greeks? He certainly didn't imagine Greece being able to send military force up to Pontic. It was impossible, and he recognized this. So for me, it's a further question about Greek policy in May 1919 and their entry into Asia Minor, which surely would have made the plight of the Pontic Greeks worse, but there was nothing he could do about it. I'm not sure whether that's a question or a statement, but I'd be interested in your feeling.
And is there one other question from the room?
Yes, if I may.
Okay. Yes, please.
It's a question or indeed a suggestion for Victoria Abrahamian. I believe you will find confirmation in the Bibliothèque du Bar in Paris. The archivist there, Boris Hajamian, who's taking his PhD in the next week, or whatever it's called, Director of Research, he is in possession of material on the Armenian diaspora's influence on French policy in Syria. If you use it, it's a very rich, and there is material confirming your case in this library. I urge you to be in touch with him. He's terrific. The library is wonderful. And I think you will find it a great assistance to use this resource because it will highlight the Armenian diaspora's role in alerting French officials with whom they have very cordial relations, difficult but cordial at the same time. So it's simply a helping hand. I hope you take it.
Great. So Victoria and Zainab, if you take 1 or 2 minutes at most to respond very quickly, that would be really great.
Thank you very much for all the comments, remarks. I start from the beginning. Jane Cohen's many questions. It's easy to reply very quickly. In fact, there was not such a case that Armenians were given the Greek citizenship and then deported. It was the Armenian fears. Maybe it was not clear in my speech. So it was the fears of the Armenians that if they take the citizenship, that might be deported anyway. It did not. So this did not happen. And then if Greek government saw the Armenians as competitors, yes, definitely, even in farming, they assumed that the incoming Armenian refugees were more entrepreneurs than the Asia Minor refugees in many cases, who were in fact used to get the relief. And this was a jealousy. There was also some sort of jealousy there. And then the Greek government, in fact, Armenian refugees changed their mind in the end of the 90s and asked the citizenship, because I think the main reason why in the beginning they refused it, because they didn't know still how to be Armenian and be the citizen of another country. It was still in internal thinking, how to keep the Armenianness and be the citizen of the local countries. I think it's a bit because of these internal discussions. And then thank you very much for providing the date. I think the 48 was a big, the largest, immigration to Soviet Armenia happened after Second World War between 46 and 48, where over 100,000 Armenians arrived in Soviet Armenia. But I do not know when Soviet Union sent back their Greeks. So this had happened before, because I didn't consult any archival material after that date, because in fact my research period is interwar years and I stopped there. But because I saw that Greek refugees were indeed sent, I assumed that it must be happened still in the 30s, but maybe I am wrong. As I said, it's not my field of expertise.
Actually, if I may say, it's for 1930s, latter half of 1930s, they were deported, and they were mostly Pontic. So they were sent, especially, after some of the executions that came with the Stalinist hunt, they had to escape, basically.
Okay. Then here is the answer. And then for the name, I would be much grateful, because I did not understand the name of the Armenian scholar. I would very much appreciate if you could please share the name and contact details with me. It would be much, much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yes, Boris Ajamian.
Boris Ajamian, the director of Nubar Library, I see. Thank you.
It's the Bibliothèque Nubar in Paris.
Yes.
which is all-
Thank you very much. I know him. Thank you.
I'll be very quick, if I may. First of all, let me just add, kind of defense of my refugees who ended up in Greece. I mean, the local populations, they consider the local populations lazy. I guess everyone else considers other populations lazy and not working and getting money from the government. So just to, defend. So maybe, I don't know. But in terms of the PowerPoint, I'm very sorry. My PowerPoint just collapsed right at the beginning of my talk, and then it came up with subtitles and I couldn't stop them. My apologies. But thank you very much for your comment question. Actually, Venizelos, from the very beginning, didn't really plan or intend, or maybe also didn't have the means to do much. So yeah, probably he thought that it's something that needs to be dealt with locally. To be very honest, I think his understanding of Greek nationalism didn't extend as far as Pontus. I mean, Pontus was, really the odd bunch. So it didn't really fit within the, idealized Greek type. Their language was, little bit different than the more standardized Greek language. So basically, he, as you suggested, he left the issue to be taken care of locally, maybe as a mandate, maybe as a part of the Armenian Republic that would be established under some sort of American or British overseeing. But basically, whatever the solution is, he didn't want to commit any kind of responsibility, any kind of undertaking coming from mainland Greek. So, and that actually meant that in the in the overall progression of the Pontic question, after 1922 to 1923, Pontic Greeks remained as refugees, moving from one place to the other. They ended up in Soviet Republic. They had to flee Soviet Republic at several points. They went to Greece and they were not welcomed in Greece. And they ended up in Australia, in Europe. So this is a constant story of homelessness, which is one of the long-term consequences of their uprooting and dispossession.
With that, terrific. Now, we're 12 minutes over time, and I apologize for that. But it was a great discussion, terrific papers. Thank you very much, and thank you for all the excellent questions as well. So we're breaking for lunch, as I understand it, and we'll see everyone in about an hour, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you. What next? So we're breaking for lunch and we start again 1:30 London. Okay.
And what do we start with?
No. Okay, sorry.
Economy, is it?